I want to sort of break down the Buffalo Bills' first official depth chart. I want to go through, we're going to go position by position through this first depth chart. So, maybe if you're watching on desktop or on TV, pull it up on your phone. I'm going to walk through it here as well. Some of you might have already seen the depth chart, and you'll have some things you want to say in the comment section. Some of you might be hearing this depth chart for the first time, so it might be interesting to you. So starting things off, not even really a question. Quarterback, it's Josh Allen, it's Case Keenum, and then it's Matt Barkley, 1, 2, and 3.
Mm-hmm.
So let's skip ahead to running back, which I thought was interesting. And again, Buffalo Bills, this could just be, whether it was with cornerback, which we talked about earlier, running back now, it might just be the Buffalo Bills wanting these young guys to prove themselves early on in preseason and work their way up the depth chart. But the running back depth chart is Devin Singletary, RB1, Zach Moss, RB2. The RB3 position is split between James Cook and Tywan Jones. The RB4 spot is split between Duke Johnson and Raheem Blackshear. So what were your first thoughts when you're looking at this running back depth chart that has Zach Moss ahead of James Cook?
I wasn't surprised, actually. I feel like this is going to be a theme we're going to see as we go throughout the depth chart. There's not a single rookie listed in the first team, including the punter, by the way, as we get to that. But I had kind of figured, right? Like one of the things that I wanted to look for in training camp was the usage of James Cook. That was the number one thing I was looking for. Obviously, they've kind of mixed him in some of the return game. He's going to be playing out of the backfield a lot. He's going to be playing maybe in the slot some. So to me, like, I'm not surprised he's not listed as the second team back, because I think what the Bills are doing is they're saying, like, look, we're going to list our like guys that are going to run the ball, right, as the first two guys on the running back depth chart. And James Cook, we're going to kind of hide here maybe as our third running back, because like maybe he will be the third running back, but that doesn't mean he's not going to be playing potentially more snaps than a guy like Zach Moss in any given game, because he's going to get some reps at receiver and otherwise. So I'm not really surprised by this, honestly. I think that Tywan Jones kind of being there split with him is a clear indication that obviously Tywan appears, with the extension he got, to be locked in as that fourth running back, gonna make the team. And it was kind of like a respect to Tywan to kind of put him there and not put him behind the rookie. So
I almost feel like the splits that they did, Cook and Jones, Johnson and Blackshear, was almost like legitimate running back, special teamer, right?
Yeah.
So Cook, legitimate running back, Tywan Jones, special teamer. Duke Johnson, legitimate running back. No offense to Raheem Blackshear, because it's still early in his NFL career, more of a special teams return guy. So I almost feel like that was the split. Like Tywan Jones is number one, special teams only running back. Raheem Blackshear is the number two. But that was super interesting as well. And it could also be a situation, again, we're just going way into the weeds here, where Singletary and Moss are going to be your first and second down running back. So Devin Singletary is your first and second down running back. Zach Moss is your backup first and second down running back. And then James Cook, who's on the third team, you mentioned, it's because he's a specialty player. He comes in on those third down situations, in those 2-minute situations, etc. He's utilized as a receiver and things of that nature. So that could be another reason, but I think it's more so what we talked about at the beginning, burying those rookies on the depth chart to
just
send them a little bit of a lesson. It's probably been a while since they've been buried on the depth chart. So just trying to put them in their place. Wide receiver is interesting as well. Walking through the depth chart here now, as I walk through the depth charts, it's important to note the Bills receivers are very versatile. Chad Hall was talking about this. They want guys to be able to move around and play multiple spots, even though, Gabriel Davis is listed as a Z receiver, which is the typical boundary flanker. He's in the slot all the time. He's lined up near the line of scrimmage all the time, etc. So walking through the depth chart here at the X receiver spot, Stephon Diggs' spot, it's Diggs first team, Kumaro second team, Tanner Gentry third team, Neil Pau'u fourth team. Gentry and Pau'u both stood out in the red and blue scrimmage, but they're more practice squad type of players. At the Z receiver, which is the flanker, Gabriel Davis is wide receiver 1. Isaiah Hodgins, who's been the talk of a lot of beat reporters, stringing some practices together lately. Case Keenum said during his media availability that Isaiah Hodgins is a guy that you just naturally look for Like he's just that one of those guys where when he's out on the field and you're playing with him, you always just want to have like one eye on him because he's having that kind of camp. He has that kind of connection with second string quarterback Case Keenum, who's been there and done that in this league. So he's making a name for himself here. And then the third team Z receiver is Marcus Stevenson, who's obviously out of the equation with an injury. And then the slot is 4 deep. McKenzie 1, Crowder 2, Shakir 3, and then Tavon Austin 4. I'm going to get your thoughts on the wide receiver position, and then we are going to hit up your boy Lettuce's super chat here.
Well, when you think about it, it honestly makes a lot of sense, right? Because it would probably be odd to list Jamison Crowder on the depth chart as an outside receiver. So you knew Kumaro was the direct backup to Diggs just from a depth chart perspective. Does that mean he's going to be the first guy on the field after Stephon Diggs? Maybe not, right? Like you said, the receivers in the Bills room are versatile. Khalil Shakir down there as the third string slot. I'm not surprised. It's going to be the trend we're going to see throughout this depth chart as the rookies are kind of buried. So the only thing you maybe could have said was like, if you're going to put Khalil Shakir as an outside receiver on the depth chart, but I think the Bills really stuck to natural positions here, right? Even if guys can play inside and out, like a guy like Shakir can, like a guy like Crowder can, they kept them in their natural position for this depth chart, which really only left Isaiah Hodgins and Marquez Stevenson to be the direct backup to Gabe Davis. And with Stevenson's injury, it makes sense now for Hodgins to be there. So as you start to dissect it a bit, it actually really kind of makes sense. Obviously, going into camp, we thought Crowder would be the number one slot, but it's not like McKenzie's a rookie. So to see McKenzie ahead, not totally unsurprising, especially given the camp that he's had and Crowder missing time. So, had McKenzie been maybe more on the younger side or first, second year, like that would have been more of a surprise, but he is a veteran. So none of this is super surprising to me, to be perfectly honest.
I'll tell you what, the number one comment someone mentioned in the comment section, I had it up there a second ago. Just find a way to get Isaiah Hodgins onto this roster. I'm not going to go that far, but I will say that I think that he might be the number one player that I have my eyes on this preseason. I loved him coming out. His advanced analytics in college, especially in the red zone per SAS, were insane. Some of the statistics he put up in the red zone. He's got great ball skills. Kind of maybe a little bit of like Alan Lazard-esque, that guy who plays in Green Bay that we mentioned earlier at the top of the show. So it's going to be
Bills could use it. They can use a third reliable outside receiver. They really could.
And it's tough because you think, like, is he an outside receiver? He's listed as an outside receiver. Is he more of a big slot? That's why the preseason, I think, is going to give you a really solid indicator. The Bills typically seem to be using him at the Z. Like, everyone talks about him and says, well, he's a big slot. He's a big slot. He's a big slot. I watched that Bills YouTube like inside story on him from last year. I look at this depth chart. He's always listed and always seems to be playing the flanker spot. So he always does seem to be on the boundary. But I will say this, I'm getting Daryl Johnson vibes from Isaiah Hodgins. He goes out there, he has a solid preseason. The Buffalo Bills feel like they can't justify a roster spot for him. Maybe they can get a conditional draft pick for an Isaiah Hodgins. It would sting, just like losing Daryl Johnson stung last year. Less now, but losing Daryl Johnson stung last year because he was young. Mario Addison and Jerry Hughes were older. Now you get to a situation where, and again, this is projecting because we have no idea what's going to happen in these next 3 preseason games. But Isaiah Hodgins goes out there and he balls out, and the Bills can't find a roster spot for him because of a aging Jamison Crowder on a 1-year deal. It breaks your heart a little bit. Now you probably quickly forget because he goes off to another team and does literally nothing, probably just like Daryl Johnson did. And you have a draft pick because of it, but it does sting a little bit in the initial in the initial time it happens. But that's the vibes I'm getting from Isaiah Hodgins. He's 100% the number one player I have my eye on to start this preseason. Your boy Lettuce coming in. He wants to just skip all the way down to punter. So we're going to skip down to punter for your boy Lettuce here. He says Hawk as punter 1 is the Bills trying to get a 6th round pick for him. There's that. There's also just trying to keep maybe the rookie in his place. But, someone mentioned it in the comment section. I think it was your boy Lettuce. The Packers traded a 6th round pick a couple of years ago for Corey Bojorquez. There aren't a lot of great punters in this league. Brandon Beane had a lot of good things to say about Matt Haack at his end of the year press conference, kind of has to. He was signed relatively early in the free agent process 2 years ago, so maybe there were some other suitors. NFL GMs look at some dudes differently than, we as fans do. Like, that's clear. So maybe there is a GM out there who might have an interest in a guy like Matt Haack, and might be willing to trade a draft pick for him, but I really doubt it.
It'd be
I don't
really
know. What are your
funny if
thoughts
he
on
did
that?
it. It would be really funny if
It'd be,
somehow he did end up in
it'd
Green
be a
Bay
bigger
because
upset than Russell. It'll be a bigger upset than Russell Bodine, in my opinion.
I agree. But we know how
Yeah.
Crosby struggled last year with Bajorquez holding the ball for them. I mean, I don't think they're going to go full circle with it, but
Mhm.
um, yeah, holders do matter. And like if someone has a crappy holder and they're not that great of a punter, it's not going to happen. But it'd be a seventh. I mean, I mean, Brandon Beane got a 7th-round pick for Lee Smith and got a
Mhm.
draft pick for Russell Bodine. So stranger things have happened. Got draft pick for AJ McCarron. I know that's quarterback, but still, stranger things have happened. So don't rule it out completely.
On to tight end now. Really no surprises. Dawson Knox, OJ Howard, Tommy Sweeney. Then it's followed by sort of Quentin Morris and and Jalen Weidemeyer sort of splitting that fourth unit spot.
Hmm.
Um, if there was going to be an upset, like Sweeney being at a Howard would have been, I think, one of the things based on what like the beat reporters have been saying at training camp. That would have been was something I would have been looking for. Did
Right.
Sweeney jump OJ Howard on the depth chart? But no, he didn't. So I think that goes a long way to proving that maybe Reggie Gilliam, especially with that extension, is going to be TE3 fullback one.
Hmm.
And what you've been banging the drum all along, it's going to be a 2 tight end football team with that fullback. I've been saying not so fast, my friend. Tommy Sweeney has I think a lot of supporters and allies in that locker room, both in the coaching staff, the front office, the players. I think though, even though he's had good practices, I think he's going to have to put up in some of these preseason games in order for the Bills to feel like they can't just sneak him onto a practice squad. What are your thoughts on the tight end depth chart here?
Yeah, I mean, no surprises, but on that point, it's like if the Bills really only have faith in Tavon Austin to return punts, like I'm
Mhm.
sorry, Tommy Sweeney, you're probably gone, right? Like because the Bills aren't gonna cut in another receiver to only keep 6 and keep Tavon Austin on the roster, right? They're gonna have to keep 7 if they want to keep
Mhm.
Tavon Austin on the roster if it gets down to that again, right? So they kept 2 last year, so it's not out of the equation, right? They kept 2 plus Gilliam. I think that it's very much in play last year, especially given the inactives we saw for Sweeney towards the end of last year. And I know that was maybe somewhat driven by, personnel and scheme decisions, but they're not going to be afraid probably to go that route now that they have a really solid veteran in OJ Howard
Mhm.
behind Dawson Knox, and they just obviously inked Reggie Gilliam to that extension. So I'll be banging the drum still for the 2 tight ends plus Gilliam probably
Mhm.
all throughout the preseason and the rest of practices up until
And
cut down day.
And that's personally what I want as a fan. If we can keep that 7th wide receiver, keep that 10th or 11th corner, I would like that more than Tommy Sweeney as much as I like Tommy Sweeney as a person. I just roster construction wise, I'd like to see that. Sophia comes in and she says, has Gilliam played tight end? He's been all over the place. He's been a Swiss Army knife. He's a 4-phase special teamer. He's lined up at fullback. He's split out wide. He's played some tight end. He has been all over the place for the Buffalo Bills. I think he's going to be, I'm not going to say he's going to be a major part of the Bills offense, but I think he's
Maybe
going to
more
see,
than last year, maybe.
yeah, I think he's going to be a more significant player in this offense than he has been in years past. You started to see an uptick last year towards the time we got into the playoffs. I think you might see that more consistently throughout the season. He's been all over the place. He has been playing tight end and fullback and that 4-phase special teams, which is why I will forever and always call Jake Kumaro a roster lock. I don't think anyone, even Isaiah Hodgins, is coming for his spot because of that special teams abilities. All right, offensive line now. I want to start with tackle.
Mm-hmm.
Left tackle on the first initial depth chart is Deion Dawkins, Tommy Doyle, Luke Tenuta. Right tackle is first team David Quessenberry, second team Spencer Brown, third team Bobby Hart, and then the fourth team Alec Anderson. a couple of interesting things here. Obviously, number one, Quessenberry over Spencer Brown. Another thing where I was sort of laughing at some people in the comments section when they brought it up in weeks past, and now I'm going to have to eat some crow again. But I also think that that might have to do with Spencer Brown's injury. Another thing, a second thing to point out, Tommy Doyle, Luke Tenuta, and Bobby Hart are all guys who are regularly taking, at least Doyle and Hart are regularly taking first team reps at guard on like a daily basis. And Tenuta has been taking a lot of reps at guard as well. So how do you read into what's going on at tackle here, especially with guys like Doyle and Hart spending so much time on the inside because of injuries?
Well, I don't like that personally, but I think the depth chart kind of, at least at left tackle, makes sense to me. I think Tommy Doyle was probably the natural backup at left tackle. Um, Given the situation with Quessenberry playing right tackle last year and Spencer Brown being injured, I think they're giving the nod to Quessenberry here on the initial depth chart, showing a little bit of a tribute to him being a veteran and him being
Consistent.
he is consistently there throughout practice so far, right? Like he's
Mhm.
been there every day and he's been there throughout practice so far, and and Spencer Brown hasn't, right? He like Jeremy says, he's a fan favorite, but was up and down, and he's just coming back from injury. I also don't necessarily think it would be fair to Spencer Brown to maybe put that pressure on him as the first team right tackle, at least on this depth chart. Then maybe he feels like he's got to come back even quicker than he's already trying to.
Mhm.
So look, first depth chart before a preseason game is played, I don't have a problem giving the nod to the veteran here in Quessenberry and then seeing how these next couple weeks play out. Um, and look, I don't love the idea of Hart and Doyle playing inside, but
Yeah.
I think that's just a numbers thing right now in
Mhm.
practice. And you see that they're not listed on the inside, obviously on the depth chart. But um, I guess that's kind of the theme for me. Like this whole depth chart we're going through is like a lot of people are making out like Questenberry's the right tackle, like, you know, Shakir's buried on the depth chart, blah, blah. Like, but like for me, I'm not surprised by a lot of
Mhm.
this at all. And that's kind of been my feeling as we've gone through this depth chart.
Got a super chat here from Sophia. She says, "Smash that like, terrific show. Thanks. Thank you, Sophia, for the super chat. Remember, if you super chat anytime during the show, you get yourself into a drawing for a 26 shirt that we will be giving of your choice that we will be giving away before the Bills Rams game. So anyone who super chats gets themselves in the running for a 26 shirt. So always thanking you guys, the super chatters. Always appreciate you and everyone else in the comment section as well. I'll tell you what, I look at this too. I think number two, the second thing I want to see behind Isaiah Hodgins, I want to see Tommy Doyle at guard in the preseason. Just like I want to see that big dude playing on the interior. We've had this conversation inside the Cover One group chat a multitude of times, and if you type in Tommy Doyle's size and weight into like the mock draftable website and come up with his player comps as a guard, it's not a pretty sight in terms of players who have had success in the National Football League that size playing guard. The only name that's ever really stuck with me thinking about Tommy Doyle playing guard, and this is still a guy who's 3 inches shorter, that's on Andrews Pete from the New Orleans Saints. He's a taller guy who plays on the interior. So it'll be really interesting to see Tommy Doyle, but uh, it's it's weird. The concern about the offensive line is real. We talked about at the top of the show, but I also, again, and maybe I'm wrong, and let me know if I'm wrong in doing this. Am I putting too much stock in the fact that when the lights go on and it's for real, the Aaron Cromer effect is going to help this offensive line get by?
Um, no, I don't think so. I think they're
Mhm.
going to get by. I think that there's going to be like, it's not gonna be perfect, right? Like, for us
Mhm.
to think that Aaron Cromer can just wave a magic wand and everyone's gonna be a stud, like it's not how it's gonna be. There's still gonna be misplays. There's still gonna be missed blocks, but I think, you know, he's gonna get these guys as prepared as he possibly can, and I think the line will be
Mhm.
more prepared than they have been in years past. So knowing what the guy next to them's doing and like mentally being sharper. So while physically there may still be limitations, I think mentally you're going to see a sharper unit, even if there are still some, plays where physically they just, can't compete. I think mentally you'll see it. You'll see an improvement.
Deckard King comes in and says, "Do you think the line is better or worse than last year, as is coaching included?" Better. I think it's better.
It's better with coaching included,
But
for
also,
sure.
I still don't think it was addressed enough. At the same time, I still do not think it was addressed enough. But speaking of that, inside, looking at left guard, Roger Saffold, who's back at practice, is your first team left guard. Ike Bodker is your second team left guard, despite
Yeah,
just
that's interesting.
not playing and not going to be playing for a while. They put all their injured guys on this depth chart, by the way.
Yep.
Greg Van Roten was the third team, but really second team, in all honesty, left guard. And then Justin Simmons came in the third team. Right guard, it was Ryan Bates, first team, Cody Ford, second team, Tanner Owen, third team. Then they went 4 deep at offensive center, Mitch Morse, followed by Greg Manx, followed by Jacob Capra, and then our guy, Derek Kierstetter, on the fourth team. That might have been a bad pick for sleeper, but
yeah, well, hey, that's a sleeper for a reason, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, this is where all the rotation has been so far in training camp, with guys like Quessenberry early getting reps at right guard, left guard. As of late, Bobby Hart getting reps at left guard, Cody Ford playing a lot of guard. Tommy Doyle was the first team right guard today. So seeing a lot of these guys, these tackles moving in, what does that say about what the depth of the guards are showing there early?
I'll tell you this, like, they're putting a lot of eggs in this Roger Saffold basket, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're probably so happy to see him getting back into action. Like, really unfortunate situation with the car accident, putting him behind. But he's a veteran and he's back. It's, we're not even to the double-digit days yet of August, so that makes you feel better. But man, I kind of feel bad for Greg Van Roten getting put behind Ike Butker a little bit. That one's a little bit odd, given that he's probably not going to be back till midway through the season. Gotta feel bad for that, but maybe that's just like, oof, I don't know.
Maybe the
That
Bills
was one of the
had
biggest
to do it. I mean, that speaks to how highly the Bills think of Ike Butker.
Exactly, like how highly they think of Ike Butker, that he's second.
Maybe that's to send a message to all these guys who are like filling in at left guard while
Like,
Saffold's out. Like, stop sucking. Like, stop being so bad. The thing oh, sorry, you can keep going.
I was just saying, but in all seriousness, though, like, there is a lot of pressure on Roger Saffold, right, to deliver this year, because he goes down, the whole thing gets turned on its head, and that's not a situation you want to be with if you're the Bills.
Yeah, and here's the thing too. My concern right now, it will become a bigger concern if tackle becomes an issue. But I mean, Josh Allen makes so many plays on the run, right? Like, even when that pressure gets up through the interior and he gets forced out of the pocket, he can make those off-platform throws. He can make things happen while scrambling, etc. This came to me because someone mentioned, they'll get by because Josh is a magician. My concern isn't so much pass blocking yet. Obviously, we get into some of these games that could change, a la the Pittsburgh Steelers game last year, and the Jacksonville Jaguars game last year. But my concern right now is not having, that change up, not having that off speed stuff. What I mean by that is not having the ability to run the ball when we need to, or run the ball effectively. My concern right now, and this is what I'm looking for in the preseason from these guards, it's not pass blocking, because I feel like with Josh Allen, we can maybe get by with semi-subpar pass blocking. It is the run blocking, the ability to have that change up. That's what I'm looking for this preseason from Aaron Cromer and these guys up the middle, is, can we run the football between the tackles? Pops Mafia comes in and says run blocking is the problem. Sophia comes in and says, kind of wish we drafted Dylan Parham, even though she really likes Bernard. Kendall would agree with you.
But do you think that do you think that that's why the Bills went after a guy like Saffold, knowing that he's a better run blocker than a pass blocker, because they know
really
Josh Allen can do some improv? Like, it makes sense.
I think the Roger Saffold signing was 100% to try to kickstart and jumpstart the run game. To be honest with you, especially and no offense to Mitch Morse, because he's, a friend of the network and he is a very, very good NFL center. Most honest critics will tell you, being 6'6", he's more of a pass blocking center than a run blocking center. You're giving up a little bit in the run game with Mitch Morse, at least between the tackles. He's really good with those pin and pulls in order to get his veteran leadership and his pass blocking experience, etc. So putting a big old dude in Ryan Saffold to the left, bringing back a big old dude in Ryan Bates to the right. Hopefully, if our starters are healthy, that's enough. But if just one of them gets hurt, it becomes very, very scary, as you mentioned. Silas Whittle comes in and said, having bad guards is the norm for Josh. As long as he can run efficiently, I'm good. And that's the thing, right? So having bad guards is the norm for Josh. And I really wish we would have drafted one higher because I liked a lot of them in the class, the interior offensive linemen. And I feel like we're one injury away from just having the same problem on offense that we always have. Like, the Pittsburgh game, the Jacksonville game, we see what that inability to pass block in certain games can do to this offense and how it can stymie this offense and how it can hold this team back. And I get that they went out and they signed Roger Saffold, who's going to hopefully be good. And they brought back Ryan Bates, who's hopefully going to be good. But man, just one of them goes down and we are right back to where we have been the last 2 years with this concern along the interior of the offensive line. What are your thoughts on that?
100% agree. I thought that if we had stayed pat in the first round of the draft, I would have been perfectly content taking a guard in the late 20s, like, whether it
Kendrick
was
Green.
Kendrick Green or Zion Johnson or whoever. Dylan Parham was the guy there in the third, right? That was kind of standing out. And obviously, I've grown to love Terrell Bernard, the potential prospect there, but Dylan Parham was still there. I am very much in the camp of where this Bills team is in its journey, that they are in a position where they can afford to not take like a sexy pick in the draft, like at a skill position. They could take an offensive lineman and it would look like a genius move down the road. I think that after the Bills invested in Spencer Brown and Tommy Doyle last year, they didn't want to make more investments in younger offensive linemen, and they'd rather take the route of going for, signing a guy like Saffold for 1 year and then kind of seeing how the chips fall in 2023. But in reality, like, the guard position is still not settled. And this is, by the way, with us expecting that Ryan Bates is going to perform well at right guard this year. That's also the expectation. So we will see if that plays out. I mean, I have high hopes for both him and Saffold, but if it is a razor thin behind them. Like, you need those guys intact for almost every game this year.
Yeah, and a number of people have mentioned Cody Ford in the comment section. I was ready to write Cody Ford off because guys like Bobby Hart and Greg Van Roten were getting run in front of him. We mentioned that, I think, on the previous show, but I haven't had a chance to read the articles that were posted today. Came straight from work to do this show, so I hadn't read the reports from camp today, but I did see the headlines, and one of the headlines was like, Cody Ford has a good day. So I guess maybe Cody Ford had a good day today.
Hey.
So kudos to him, but I spent a good amount of time, I think, last night ripping on him on social media. So again, they clearly follow the Bills guys account, watch this show. We inspire them on a weekly basis. Onto the defense now. Looking at the defensive line edge rusher. One side was Gregory Rousseau, Boogie Basham, Mike Love, and then Kingsley Jonathan. 1, 2, 3, 4. The other side was Von Miller, AJ Epinesa, Shaq Lawson, and then Daniel Joseph. 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think the two biggest takeaways for me, AJ Epinesa right behind Von Miller and Shaq Lawson on the third team. What are your thoughts on how the edge rusher depth chart shook out? Also, before you get to it too, we can finally stop calling Von Miller a linebacker. Edge was what he was called on the depth chart. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, you're paying him that money to be an edge. You're not paying him, and especially in the Bills 4-3, right? So look, I mean, obviously people are going to talk about AJ Epinesa being ahead of Shaq Lawson, but if it was the other way around and Shaq Lawson was ahead of AJ Epinesa, you'd be hearing people saying like, well, AJ Epinesa, we put high draft capital in him and he's buried, third on the depth chart. Like, so it's interesting. I think ultimately it doesn't really matter which side you put AJ Epinesa or Shaq Lawson on. I think the 5 edge guys that are, quote, the top 5, and obviously Mike Love is kind of on equal footing right now with Shaq Lawson, but
Mhm.
like Rousseau, Miller, Basham, Epinesa, and Lawson, like those 5 guys, I don't really care where you put them on the depth chart right now. Like one of those guys had to be 5th, right?
Mhm.
Mathematically. So it was either going to be Epinesa or Lawson, or it could have even been Basham. I mean, it could have been him too, but one of those guys would have had to be 5th because there's just an odd number of guys. So it just happened to be Shaq Lawson. And I think that's fair, right? AJ Epinesa was a 2nd-round pick. You know, he's had promise. Like Shaq Lawson was a guy you signed as kind of, let's call it what it is. It
Mhm.
was a bargain bin free agency signing. So for me, I like the fact that AJ Epinesa, at least for now, is listed ahead of Shaq Lawson.
Yeah, and just Jessica Tennis made a great comment. She said somebody's got to be a third teamer with sort of the depth here. I think it's interesting, maybe again, if you want to try to read some tea leaves, that it's Lawson behind Epinesa on the right side, which, think back to Shaq Lawson's first stint with the Bills. That was a big thing, right? He didn't do well on the right side. He's a left end. So now he's on the right side. So maybe Mike Love is maybe making a name for himself. Maybe Mike Love could usurp Shaq Lawson when it comes time for the 53, but that's a real long shot, and that's trying to read maybe probably too much into the depth chart, which is something I thoroughly enjoy doing here, because we're going to move on to defensive tackle now. No surprises here.
Nope.
At the 3 tech, Ed Oliver first team, Jordan Phillips second team, Brandon Bryant third team, Prince Emili fourth team. The 1 tech, it was Daquan Jones first team, Tim Settle second team, Eli Anku third team. He's still on the PUP list to my knowledge, and CJ Brewer is the fourth team. As much as I like Brandon Bryant, and I think he'll probably be like the veteran on this practice squad,
Mhm.
unless they prefer the traits of an Eli Anku, who's more of a nose. This is set in stone, right? With these top 4 guys, like
I mean,
I
this
don't think I think we're going to be seeing a lot of the last 3, Bryant, Emili, and Brewer in the preseason, because I don't think you're going to want to risk any of these guys' injury.
100%, and especially when you know you're probably only keeping 4, like you're not
Mhm.
going to see a ton of action from these guys, all vets, right?
Yeah.
And they all have their roles. They know what their roles are going to be. This is probably the cleanest, most unsurprising part of this depth chart.
Linebacker was a little interesting.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of these guys rotate around, so maybe don't read too much into the positions, but at the Sam linebacker spot, it was Matt Milano first team, followed by Mr. Suspended, Andre Smith second team, and Balon Spector third team. At middle linebacker, which is again something of note, Tremaine Edmonds first team, Terrell Bernard second team, despite that lack of size to be maybe a true Mike, Tyler Matakevich third team, and then the will linebacker spot, Tyrell Dodson first team, Joe Giles Harris second team, Markel Lee third team. I think what's interesting here is maybe putting a guy like Giles Harris, even though he's on the other side, second team above a Balon Spector, because I think we've heard, at least from the beat reporters, more about Spector. He's also a draft pick, that draft capital. But again, it might go back to this earn it type of thing, especially with Andre Smith being suspended. So technically, he's probably second team. But just the way that they position these guys, a little confusing here.
A little interesting. I would have expected, and again, I would have expected Terrell Bernard probably to be,
Weak
second team right
will
behind.
linebacker. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And but it wasn't, right? And Andre Smith being suspended is kind of more of just like a formality here with Spectre there behind him. Now, I do think the Spectre treatment is again what we've seen throughout this entire depth chart, which is the rookies have been kind of put down a peg, maybe like 1 or 2 pegs below where we think they're going to end up, but
Yeah.
where they're going to end up on the initial depth chart is going to be down, right? Like there's going to be 3 more depth charts that come out between now probably in the start of the season. So again, earn it situation. I think Joe Giles Harris being second team weak side is just again a nod to
Mhm.
him being the veteran and being the guy that's come in and done it every day, been on the practice squad with his Bills team, a professional, right?
Yeah.
So um, I did think the alignments, right, and like what
Yeah.
positions guys were in were a little bit interesting, but the actual like, kind of depth, and sequencing of it wasn't too
Mhm.
surprising. But it is interesting that they have Milano listed as a strong side backer
Yeah.
and Dodson listed as weak side, which if correct me if I'm wrong, in the past it had been Dodson on the strong side and Milano on the weak side, was it not?
Yeah, I believe so, but that just could be the way that they label it. I wouldn't look too much into that because when you look at the backups, Balon Spector is the backup. Andre Smith being Matt Milano's backup was a little interesting to me. I think I would have expected Bernard to be behind Milano and
Yep.
Smith to be
That's
behind
what I would have thought.
Edmonds. That's what I
Yep.
would have thought. That's the only real thing that's really thrown me for a loop. But I think in reality, Dodson is Edmonds' backup, Bernard is Milano's backup, and then you push everyone back, which makes Bernard the third team middle linebacker, makes Smith and Spector the third team Sam linebackers. So yeah, it's interesting, definitely noteworthy. So uh, it'll be interesting to see again once we get into preseason who's lining up where. Does it align with the depth chart that the Buffalo Bills posted?
Right.
Because who knows? I feel like we're probably putting more thought into the Buffalo Bills depth chart than maybe they did because it's the preseason
They're just
and
like,
then
yeah, put all the rookies at the
yeah.
bottom. Whatever, it doesn't matter.
uh, onto the secondary now. Again, super interesting. Trey White, despite being on the PUP list, is CB1. Christian Benford is behind him, CB, second team, and then Jamarcus Ingram is third team. Then all the way on the other side at cornerback, you have Dane Jackson first team, Kyer Elam second team, Tim Harris third team. Then you're four deep in the slot. It's Taron Johnson, then Saran Neal, then Cam Lewis, then Elijah Griffin. You'll notice I did not say Nick McLeod. That is because he was listed on this initial depth chart as the third team free safety, which we'll get to in a moment. So, what are the biggest shockers for you on the cornerback depth chart?
I mean, the biggest shocker is probably Benford, right? As the second
Mm-hmm.
team behind Trey White. But then as you start looking at the rest of the lineup, like the only real logical person they probably could have put there would have been Tim Harris, right? I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
it's like I mean, you start thinking about it and you're like,
Nick
okay,
McLeod.
well, I mean, but if they're putting him as safety,
Yeah.
then there really is no other option, especially if you're going to put Elijah Griffin
Mm-hmm.
as a slot corner. That position behind Trey White, at least on this depth chart, is it has to be either Benford or Tim Harris. So they went with Benford,
Yeah.
the guy that Brandon Bean has mentioned. And I think again, they weren't going to put any rookie in a first team slot for this initial depth chart. So Dane Jackson
And,
got the nod for now over Kyer Elam.
and again, this could be way overthinking it, but you could look at it as Trey White is the one, Dane Jackson is the two, then behind the two is the three in Elam, the
Right.
four is Benford,
That's how I read it.
the five is Harris, and the sixth is Ingram.
That's how I
So
read it.
that's another way to interpret the depth chart. Again, we're Da Vinci coding this shit tonight. Um, nickel corner was interesting. Elijah Griffin listed as the 14 nickel corner. He's been kind of quiet, at least
Yep.
per the reports of this training camp. Saran Neal, second team, but again, he's a specific kind of nickel. I feel a little bit bad for Nick McLeod. So let's bring the safeties into it now.
Yep.
Hyde has been dealing with an injury. He's back. He's not going to play a lot this preseason. Jordan Poyer dealing with that hyperextended elbow. Not going to play a lot this preseason. DeMar Hamlin is behind Hyde at free safety. Jaquan Johnson is behind Poyer at strong safety. Then the third team free safety is Nick McLeod. The third team strong safety is Josh Thomas, who's on the practice squad all of last year, almost made the 53 last year. It's interesting. Nick McLeod, I feel like because of the injuries to the top two guys, is being pushed to safety. And I feel like it's affecting his chance to win on the boundary where he might have had more of a shot.
Yeah, because I mean, you would have thought like if the Bills were going to keep 9 DBs, that maybe Nick McLeod could have been the ninth guy. But now you wonder, like with him being moved over to safety, does he have a less of a chance now of making the team? And like, so maybe does the last roster spot in the secondary come down to a guy like Cam Lewis or Nick McLeod, if you're going to give that to maybe a more traditional slot corner where we know that's not really Saran Neal's game, could it be Cam? Like it's very interesting to me. I still think at the end of the day, they only keep 4 safeties. I don't think they're going to cut Jaquan Johnson. I think that would be a surprise to me anyway. So I do kind of feel bad for Nick McLeod, but I do think that he's going to have a chance again to show what he can do in the preseason. And a strong preseason could open the door for him to maybe get a little bit more flexibility, right? And like maybe, we don't know. Like maybe he's not listed as a safety on the next depth chart. Like who knows, right? Like we don't even know what the case is going to be for him, but you do feel a little bit for him because he's a guy that you want to root for, but this is kind of what happens when you have such a good team. It's like, where do you put a guy like this? The Bills may be trying to figure out where can he have the most success and most chance to make an impact. But I don't know. I don't know with him.
Pops Mafia comes in, says Cam Lewis. Almost as interesting as the DBs because Christian Benford is someone to keep an eye on this training this preseason. Saran Neal is probably going to get a lot of run. Cam Lewis in the nickel is going to get a lot of run, maybe a little bit on the boundary. Nick McLeod, he's going to get that free safety run. Maybe he gets some corner run too. Elam, Jackson, Jaquan Johnson. Like there are a lot of young players who are going to be fun to watch. But one of the things I've been keeping an eye on in training camp that I'll also be keeping an eye on in the preseason is who is utilized at gunner and who is gunning for maybe Taiwan Jones's job. I think Saran Neal's got, with his youth and his contract, has got one of those spots locked down. But could a guy like Cam Lewis, could a guy like Christian Benford be good enough as a gunner to get the Bills to consider cutting Taiwan Jones and keeping that 10th or 11th DB? Because there is a lot of talent back there, and those players are more multidimensional than Taiwan Jones. It's a long shot, but that's where my eyes will be, I think, for guys like Cam Lewis too, as well as we get through this preseason.
Yeah, it's a long shot. And I think that, Cam Lewis, like he was last year, would be the guy that you love to just put on the practice squad again. And if something did happen to Taron Johnson, you'd then bring him up for extended period and you use Saran Neal in game for that one game. You'd like to think that the Bills would do something like that, but history has shown that they're not willing to cut guys like Matakevich, not willing to cut guys like Taiwan Jones. So it would be a surprise, like you said. Yeah, no, it's a long shot.
It was a long shot.
You did. So
yeah, so Deckard King comes in and says, agree, Judge. I think the Bills should consider a gunner who could play offense and defense as well. I mean, Dane Jackson was gunning a little bit last year and did a pretty decent job of it as well. I can't remember the situation and why he was gunning. Maybe Taiwan Jones had COVID or had missed a game or something like that. Somebody had missed some time. Maybe it was Saran Neal. Someone missed some time and Dane Jackson was gunning. I remember Dane Jackson gunning at some points last year, and they didn't really miss a beat. So I think maybe the Bills are valuing it a little too much. Don't get me wrong. Gunners are important. They're, the Matthew Slaters of the world and we used to have, what's his name? Marcus Easley and Sam Aiken. And we know that some of these Kasim Osgood for the Chargers, like there are guys who stick around for 10 years just gunning, Taiwan Jones being one of them. But man, the lack of dimension, like you don't get much else out of him. So if you could, I would love it if they would, but I just don't. It's a long shot. So speaking of long shot, it's a long shot that anyone is going to be signed, brought off the streets to take the place of kicker Tyler Bass and long snapper Reid Ferguson. So we will skip over them. We already talked about punter, thanks to your boy Lettuce. So let's move on to the special teams and the return units. First official depth chart listed only 3 kick returners and only 3 punt returners. Kick returner was Isaiah McKenzie, followed by Duke Johnson, followed by James Cook. Punt returner was Tavon Austin, first team, followed by Khalil Shakir, second team, and Duke Johnson, third team. The Bills were putting injured players all over this depth chart, but didn't seem to have a spot there for Marquez Stevenson, which is what stood out to me. What stood out to you when looking at the kick and punt returner depth charts that the Buffalo Bills released?
Something just a little noticeable to me. It's fairly minor, but Duke Johnson's the only guy listed on both. kick and punt return, which I thought was like a little bit notable. Like it gives you an outside chance to maybe think like, well, maybe the Bills would give a roster spot to Duke Johnson over Taiwan Jones if he can prove that he can play some special teams. I don't know his history on special teams if he has. I'm sure he has, but getting that 2-for-1 kick and punt returner would be nice. Although it does seem like the Bills are comfortable putting Isaiah McKenzie as the kick returner. And the point you've made on prior shows, which I've kind of, it's been a little bit of an awakening for me. The kick return game in today's NFL is not what it used to be. It's a lot of just watching the ball sail through the end zone or taking a knee. With the ball coming out to the 25 on touchbacks now, the kick return game is really not as important. Ball security, you can let the ball go. If it ends up in the end zone, it doesn't matter if you touch it or not. If it's in the end zone, it's a touchback. So that part of the game is kind of been phased out a little bit, right? For players under the guise of player safety, which, that's a whole separate discussion. Punt returning is really still very critical, right? Even if it's not about returning the kick per se, it's about fielding it cleanly, giving yourself decent field position, securing the ball. So that's the piece I think that's interesting to me. And that's the piece where you see Tavon Austin atop the depth chart, the Bills going with the veteran there, not willing to put a rookie up atop the depth chart once again.
And what's interesting, because you mentioned sort of kick return not being as important as it used to be. McKenzie, I mentioned earlier in the show, being the kick returner opens them up to probably less shots because there are more touchbacks in today's NFL than there are, fair catches when you're returning punts. So you're less likely to get those big collisions that would knock a smaller player like McKenzie out. But at the end of the day, too, and again, refresh me if I'm wrong, Isaiah McKenzie, it's hard to stand out in a negative way as a kick returner. Didn't Isaiah McKenzie do it twice last year? Colts game, fumble in the rain. Yep. Redskins game, not Reds. Censor that. It's live. Can't censor it. The Commanders game, Washington football game. Didn't he not feel the kick and then they grabbed it and then they were in the red zone? I mean, we were already up 14-0.
I think it might have been the Houston game. I can't remember. It was one of those crappy teams.
I think it was the Commanders game because I think we were up big by 2 or 3 scores.
Might have been.
And then we gave them the ball in the red zone.
You're right. You're right. And then funny enough, and it wasn't in the Steelers game where he had like the 75-yard kick return, or 70-yard kick return.
Just like to start the season. Just to start the season.
Yeah. So I mean, the Bills have been searching for answers in the return game since Andre Roberts left the building, which hopefully people now in retrospect can appreciate what Andre Roberts brought to this team, because I know there were a lot of split opinions on him, honestly.
As Greg Tomset pointed out in the Cover One group chat the other day, even though we might miss Andre Roberts, he's fallen off quite the cliff as well.
Oh, yeah. So. He has. No doubt.
Deckard King coming in saying Stevenson posted on Instagram from a hospital bed today. That's not great. My guess is he'll be some kind of, I'd have to look into how that works, whether you can PUP him if he gets hurt in camp. I don't think you can. I think they'd have to roster him and then do something to him, like put him on some kind of IR. I think if they put him on IR now, he's done for the entire season. So it'll be interesting. I have no hopes at this point to see Marcus Stevenson in 2023. But looking at kick returner, punt returner as a whole, someone mentioned Raheem Blackshear. Didn't make it to either of the depth charts, but I think you see him at some point, probably in the last preseason game, returning kicks and punts. And
it'll be your Marcus Murphy this year.
Yeah, somebody mentioned Isaiah Hodgins. They said, what did Isaiah Hodgins do on special teams? I don't know. That's a great question. Let's find out this preseason, shall we? That's another thing that I will be keeping an eye on. Isaiah Hodgins, do something noticeable on special teams so you can make the team over a guy like Jake Kumro, because really that's his only shot at this point. John DeMarchi coming in with a great point to close things out here. He said, Bills don't need a Devin Hester. Just no special teams turnovers or fumbles. Offense is plenty good enough. I agree.
That's a really good point, because the Bears were not good on offense with Rex Grossman. They needed Devin Hester.
2019 Buffalo Bills needed that field position that Andre Roberts gave them. They needed the flip field. They need to start past the 50-yard line. 2022 Bills do not need what the 2020 Bills needed. So 100% with you there, John. That's a great comment.